Hi, this is Chatlos from Ventura Partners. We're here at NACDA in Orlando and part of the ADU group, and welcome these gentlemen here today. This has been a pretty tumultuous year for college basketball. A lot of people would say that the system is fundamentally flawed and puts coaches in a tough position. How would you all characterize the health of college basketball right now?
Personally, and this might be, I might differ from these guys and a lot of other people, I think it's in a pretty good state, just in terms of the exposure. Obviously, the tournament does well. It's like college basketball is probably a 2-month, 3-month season when you get into conference play. There's definitely issues. This past year there was great talent. There were superstars in the game. I thought as you got into the Elite Eight, Final Four, National Championship game, I thought the quality of play was pretty good. But there are certain issues that you got to fix. But I think that's with anything. But overall, just in terms of that, I think it's in a pretty good state, personally.
Obviously, with the federal investigation, the optics of that obviously are not good for NCAA basketball. I would say that these issues, quote-unquote issues, that are present right now have been going on for quite some time. I think everybody would agree with that. I think what is different, which is a good thing, is obviously the Knight Commission kind of being formed and starting to address some of these issues. But I still believe that as a whole, college basketball is a great entity. A number of people who make up the entity are upstanding coaches, mentors, and I don't think you should, I know that the general public does, you can't paint a broad brush just because of these certain individuals had certain issues.
Yeah, I agree with these guys. I think it's a lot healthier than the current public opinion. I think part of the problem is, there's a lot of good things going on in our game. The majority of coaches are doing things the right way and having a positive impact on their student athletes. I think the issue is, and it's just the nature of media, is that only the negative things seem to get covered. And when it's a scandal and drama, and those are the things that get the clicks, and those are the things that get the ratings. And so I think that's part of the problem. There's not enough covering of the positive things that's going on in our game. I think the negative things being covered, represents while it has been happening for a long time, I agree with you, Coach, and it's been around for a long time. I think that's a small percentage of the overall kind of college basketball landscape.
Okay. Well, some people would say that, you've all kind of alluded to being a smaller percentage. Some people would say that those are the people that got caught, right? So, and that pretty much everyone does it, right? It's been accepted for so long. When you think about the people that got arrested and are obviously pled guilty, what do you think caused them to kind of do what they needed to do, or what they perceived they needed to do to get an edge in recruiting and crossing that line there? Right? How do you feel like you get put in that position? How would you handle that? Let's start with you this time.
Yeah, I'm not going to sit here, while I know, some of those guys, some of the assistant coaches, I'm not going to sit here and demonize them, in terms of like they're bad people. I think good people do make mistakes, and I'm not in their shoes. I don't know what's going on in their personal lives or the pressures that they were feeling within their programs. But I do think it can be, the reasons for those actions can be due to a number of things. I think there is a mentality across the board when it comes to NCAA rules that, regardless of, it could be on minor things or these more serious infractions, that, so-and-so, people that we compete against are doing the same thing. And so you have the rules, but then you also have this kind of justification, that you're trying to create for yourself. Well, everyone else is doing it, so I'm not really hurting anybody. The truth of the matter is not everyone else is doing it. I think that's kind of a cop-out to some degree, and a way to kind of, get around it. And the people that are suffering are those coaches that are doing things the right way. So I think that's something important for assistant coaches to remember moving forward. But whether it's pressure to get that top recruit so that you can win more games, so that you can keep your job, and these jobs, especially when you get to a certain level, are pretty good when it comes to benefits and salaries. You don't want to lose them. So I think all of that stuff is real. So again, I don't want to, speak for them completely, and I don't want to, demonize. I think they're, good people that just made some mistakes, and we need to think about how we should act as a whole when it comes to assistant coaches.
I think there's a kind of a trickle-down effect. I think that there are so many pressures from ADs, presidents. You see the tenures of so many head coaches, relative to 15, 20 years ago. You know, they're so much shorter. You know, in the early 80s, Coach K was hung in effigy after 3 or 4 years at Duke. And here he is, arguably one of the best college coaches of all time. In this day and time, Coach K may have been fired after his 3 or 4 years. So I think there needs to be more patience on the part of athletic directors, presidents, the stakeholders who make these decisions. Because if not, then those coaches feel that pressure, that implicit pressure. The head coaches feel that pressure that, hey, we've got to go out and get this kid. And then it goes back to the assistant coaches. Like you say, you know, these jobs are great jobs from a salary standpoint, benefit standpoint. They like those lifestyles, you know, to help take care of their families. And quite honestly, a number of the guys will do any and everything in order to keep that edge and keep that job. So I just think that there needs to be somewhat of a holistic view of, hey, what can we do to not necessarily have those quote-unquote pressures. I mean, we're going to put pressure on ourselves as it is. We're winners, we're competitors. But if in your mind you're saying, if I don't get this job, get this done in the next 2 years, I'm going to be out of a job, well, I think you'll see some of the byproducts that you have seen most recently.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sensitive issue for me, you know, just kind of being at a school that was involved in all this. You know, there are really good people who, not just good people, but really good people who do make mistakes. And I think, you know, kind of the shorter answer is I think there's just some certain level of pressure that people feel to do certain things because of the pressure that just comes with the job and to win. But again, they're not bad people. It just, you know, for whatever reason, they felt a certain level of pressure, I would guess if I had to, you know, just to get a job done or carry out the task at hand, so.
Sure. But you talked about, oh, go ahead.
Well, just, one other point, you know, I think the silver lining of all this is that, you know, up until this point, the main deterrent to not do these type of things was, you know, an NCAA violation and losing your job. And I think you have a lot of coaches that are kind of looking at the risk-reward analysis and saying, you know what, this is worth it. One, because it's not, you know, it's not too common for someone to be, you know, to have an infraction be handed to you and then you lose your job. It doesn't happen that often. Now, though, I think with the FBI's involvement, that's a whole nother level of deterrent now. Sure. That who knows? I mean, there could be investigations taking place as we speak. You know, wiretapping and all that. I think the silver lining of all this, at least as it pertains to that type of stuff amongst assistant coaches, I think you're going to have, you know, more and more people not willing to do those sort of things, knowing that the FBI could step in at any time, and you're talking about prison time and being prosecuted by the federal government.
Well, that dovetails nicely into my next question. Given the findings or the recommendations of the Rice Commission and the NCAA putting into effect, do you really feel that things are going to change? That is this a slap on the wrist and people will go back to doing kind of business as usual, or do you feel like there'll be major change because of what's taking place because of the Rice Commission?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Rice Commission I think the intent was good. I don't know if that will necessarily change things as opposed to what he was just saying in terms of the FBI getting involved. You know, that's definitely going to send shockwaves through everyone. And kind of what the fallout of that was that you could actually serve prison time for some of this stuff that you would just never think in your wildest imagination you would have to deal with. You know, I think there's bigger issues at hand. This is just one part of it. The whole, you know, we could go on and on about it, but the whole concept of amateurism. What's that going to do for things? Will the one and done rule change? At least from our perspective, that will change how you recruit going forward. And the idea of that being done or going back into effect here and kids from high school being able to go directly to the NBA here in a couple of years, that will directly change things. I personally don't think things will go back to how they were. I'm probably on the other side where I just don't think it was as out of hand as it was. Now, do people do things? Absolutely, we found that out. But I think there are the vast majority of people who do things the right way and go about it the right way and work hard and will continue to do that. And I do think, you know, as we alluded to, that I think there was a silver lining to it. And I just think the fact that people will serve prison time over this will cut out the vast majority of people. You know, to be honest, if you were to go back and do something like this again, knowing what has happened, you probably got some issues. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think that, and I may be quote-unquote outspoken when it comes to this, but the more extreme thing to happen would be is that if some head coaches were to lose their jobs, you know, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they were complicit in any of these things, but, you know, as a head coach, you have a responsibility for those three assistant coaches whom you're around more than your wife and kids, quite honestly. It is your responsibility to know what's going on. And if you do know that something's going on, I think you have the responsibility to say something. I may be in the minority when it comes to that, but until that does happen, I think these things will continue to go on, and it won't be, from an optical standpoint, from the outside looking in, people assume like this is happening all over the place, and I don't think that is the case. But nonetheless, I think that this would be a huge deterrent if some heavier penalties were to come down to head coaches, whether it be financially, whether it be loss of a job, or what have you. I just think something more needs to be done, as opposed to having these three assistant coaches who have, quote unquote, taken the fall for these head coaches who have run these programs.
I agree with Coach. I think, the tone is set at the top a lot of times when it comes as an assistant coach. You're reading your head coach in terms of whether they've told you exactly this won't be tolerated, or you just know your head coach that you shouldn't be doing those things and that he will hold you accountable for those actions. As far as the Rice Commission, I think it's easy right now to poke a lot of holes and have a negative spin on it, and I think we need to refrain from that. I think the ball is rolling in the right direction. I think a lot of things are being discussed that weren't being discussed before, or at least taken more seriously. Like now we're looking at player compensations, for their name, image, and likeness. I think that's a step in the right direction. Now that's going to be a whole nother can of worms, and I think there's intelligent people working on it, and we'll if they are going to present something, it will be buttoned up. But I think it is rolling in the right direction. Trying to refrain from judgment. I think any time that you implement changes to a structure or format that has been in place for decades, especially like the summer recruiting landscape, there are going to be some challenges and some bumps along the way, and we need to be patient. My hope is at the end of this cycle, the end of this year, the right people will come together, a group of people, stakeholders, whether it's AAU coaches, shoe companies, obviously college coaches at multiple levels, the NCAA, the NBA, USA Basketball. I think all those people need to come together after this to see how we can improve things and keep moving forward in the right direction.
Okay. Let's get to some coaching questions. I need to change it up a little bit. Do you all feel this, do you see this a lot, or do you feel this maybe in your own career, that the head coach relies on the assistant so much to just focus on recruiting and getting the guys, that they don't invest as much time as they should in developing your technical skills? So, as in our line of work, as we're looking for the next head coaches out there, a lot of times the questions come up, are the assistants ready? Are head coaches relying too much for you guys to be the recruiters and not developing your talent to be head coaches?
Yeah, I can only speak from my experience. My head coaches and the bosses that I've worked for, and I've been lucky, I've been extremely fortunate through my whole path, that every coach I've worked for has taken a vested interest in making sure I become a better coach and not just a recruiter. And that's up to the guy I work for now. He wants me to be a head coach just as much as I want to be a head coach, and he takes a vested interest in that. He allows me to organize practices. Yes, I recruit because we all have to, and that's a significant part of our job. But he allows me access to coach, to run individual workouts, to call plays, to set defense, to organize practice, to all the stuff that goes within coaching to make sure I'm ready. Allow me to do certain things in practice, late game situations in practice, things like that, and all the preparation that goes to it. So I've been fortunate. I've heard stories, from friends in the business who go through that part where they feel like they're relegated to doing just one thing. I've been extremely fortunate and blessed that everyone I've worked for has wanted to see me achieve my dream and has taken a vested interest in that, and I'm extremely thankful for that. So,
I'm in the same boat. I've been very fortunate to work with two head coaches, Wes Miller at UNC Greensboro when he first got the job there, and now Dave Paulson. And both of those guys up front said that, I want you to be a coach, holistically. I want you to be a mentor. I want you to be great in skill development. I want you to do scouting and obviously recruiting. I think it is important for us as assistant coaches to also be proactive in the areas where we've got to fill our own toolbox to some degree as well. There are certain things that I may not be responsible for on my staff. I don't handle scheduling, but it's my job to ask the guy who is doing scheduling, hey, give me some tidbits of information so that if that day does come and I need to be able to do this, how do you do it? if there's certain things that I want to get better at skill development wise, I can't just rely on my head coach to tell me, hey, specifically, this is what you're going to do. So I think a lot of responsibility is on the assistant coach and actually being proactive and actually helping yourself grow as well.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also in the same boat as these guys. I've been very fortunate to I've worked for two guys, Trent Johnson and Tommy Amaker, and both of them are great when it comes to allowing their assistant coaches to do multiple things and touch different parts of the program. I will say, I don't think it's the issue of assistant coaches being pigeonholed into one responsibility. I don't think it's as much of an issue now as it was, 40 years ago. I used to hear stories from, Coach Johnson that his job was to be on the road the entire year recruiting. This is before recruiting calendar limitations and restrictions on how many days you could be out, to the point where you're missing your own games. So I don't think it's a lot better now than it was then. I will say this though, and I think this is important too for athletic directors to also realize that assistant coaches can only control what they can control. So to your point though, be proactive, learn as much as you can, regardless of the roles that you've been delegated. But when it's all said and done, the head coach is going to make that decision. Here's your role. This is what you're doing. It may be one thing, it may be two things, maybe five things. Not everyone can be in charge of the offense. Not everyone can be in charge of the defense and all of those things. Do that job the best you can. Crush that job. Like knock it out of the park. One, you're going to earn your head coach's trust and hopefully get more responsibilities. But I also think it's a great indication, and it shouldn't be overlooked. If someone can do a very good job in one area, there's a good chance, based off their intelligence and their work ethic, that they can do that same level of job in all the other areas, even if they don't know them. You can learn them, figure it out, get it done. So I think that's important to kind of maintain that mentality as well.
What are some of the fundamental challenges that assistant coaches face when kind of balancing the job that they've been assigned, but also then trying to invest in their careers? We touched on a little bit of them there, but as you try to continue to grow to get ready to be for that head coaching interview when it comes, what are some of the challenges you face? I'll start with you this time.
I would probably say trying to balance, like you said, you want to crush the job where you are presently, really do the best you can there. But from a selfish standpoint, you also have to invest in your quote-unquote future. And the idea is now, hey, how do I figure during the course of my work week what time is for brand Duane Simpkins? And, for me, it could be at 7 o'clock in the morning before I go into the office, whether it be shooting out a few emails to, get Katie styled or whoever it is. But then once I am in the office, I'm crushing it where I am. But I think there's a balance. You have to, and that was something that I wasn't aware of until probably last 3 or 4 years. Like, hey, I want to become a head coach. The assistant, the ADs, deputy ADs, the stakeholders who are making these decisions and hires, they have to know who you are. And I think that there is that's the balancing act, right? You've got to let them know who you are so that when that decision does come, they feel some kind of connectedness to you. They're not going to hire people they don't know. But nonetheless, I can't put myself in that position if I'm not doing a great job where I presently am.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think early on for me when I was, I don't consider myself a younger assistant coach any longer, unfortunately. But coming up, sometimes, at least in my experience, the networking and all of that at times had a negative connotation to it. Like you're more interested in self-promoting and that kind of thing. And so I think that is the balance, finding the right line, doing it the right way, being genuine about developing relationships. But that was hard for me coming up. Like it wasn't easy to, go to, the athletic director at Stanford and just, hey, can I pick your brain and go out to lunch with you? Like that was a hard thing to do. So I think that is a challenge. I agree. Do the best job that you can with, your responsibilities. But I think the whole networking aspect of it is more, people are more accepting to it and expecting assistant coaches to do it more. So I think it makes it easier. But yeah, that was a challenge, at least in my experience, coming up as a young assistant coach. We do a great thing at Harvard that, our athletic director, Bob Scalise, will, a couple times a year have a workshop where it's just him and all the assistant coaches in our department. And we have 42 teams. And that, I think makes it a lot easier for the younger assistant coaches that might be a little bit intimidated or feel awkward about it, kind of get some one-on-one time and develop a relationship.
Chris, if I could, one thing I wanted to mention as well, I think that for assistant coaches, I think even within our ranks, there are still some differences in terms of how we should go about things. Me as an African-American coach, there are certain things that I have to know And I've expressed this. I was at the consortium at the Final Four, and I expressed this that, hey, as an assistant coach who's a minority, let's face it, of the Power 5 jobs, 19% of those coaches are African Americans. That's a disproportionate number of head coaches in that league. I have to do things to market myself that maybe Chris doesn't necessarily have to do. He may do it a different way. The stakeholders who make decisions, predominantly, the predominant number of them, they don't look like me, they don't talk like me. I have to do something to ingratiate myself with those people and still being myself. But there are certain things that I have to do to let them know who I am so that they do feel comfortable enough to say, hey, he's a guy that can possibly run my program.
One thing I would say on top of, working on your own brand and getting yourself out there to meet people, to put yourself in position to be a candidate now, is just the day-to-day now from being an assistant coach and trying to develop your own philosophy on things and your ideas, but carrying out your boss's vision for the program. Because that's what we're there for, is to help carry out his vision for the program. In my case, it's Andy Enfield's program. I'm there to carry out his vision and help facilitate that. But at the same time, I have to think like a head coach. And one thing I've tried to be more conscious of in the last few years, how would I handle this? How would I do this? This is what I want to do if I was in this situation. But also, like I said, carry out what he wants to do. I always try to have answers for him. I never bring anything to the table and not have an answer for him. One of the first things he does, I sit there and I say, what do you want to do? And he'll say, well, what do you want to do? And I want to make sure I have an answer for him. But to be honest with you, in my mid-20s, I probably wouldn't have had an answer for him. I just say, Coach, what do you think? What do we need to do? So now I have answers for all that stuff, and I think about it because I feel that time coming. And then it goes to his credit. He gives me a platform, and he is preparing me and putting me in positions to think like that.
Yep.
So I'm ready for when that time comes, and I slide one chair over. You know what? I thought about that. I've been in that situation. And so this is how I want to do it. This is what I want to do. Maybe this is how Andy did it. This is what I want to do as well. So I think that's the biggest thing over the last few years from being an assistant coach is, hey, you want to develop your own philosophy. You want to get better at certain things. You may have ideas on how you want to do things, but you also still have to carry out your boss's vision, and he might not agree with you on certain things. So still having different philosophies, but carrying out that vision.
Okay. What do you think, whether through going through opportunities for yourself or people you've talked to that have gone through searches, what do you feel like the average AD either doesn't know or maybe misunderstands or puts the wrong weight to certain aspects of coaching? So especially if you're looking at an assistant who's never been a head coach before, what would you want the average AD to know about the readiness or the aspects of basketball that maybe they don't know? Some ADs this is their first time being an AD and have never hired a basketball coach before. So,
yeah, I would say diversity of experience, and not just within your responsibilities, but in different places, different regions. I think you can, if you've had success in different areas, in different regions of the country and different types of institutions, I think that is something that should be valued. That should tell you something about that individual. Like they can get things done regardless of the circumstance, and they've seen a lot of different ways of getting things done. I would also kind of go back to the point where just because you may come across an assistant that only has one or two responsibilities on that current staff, try not to hold that against them if they're doing a phenomenal job in that area. Again, not everyone can have all of the, responsibilities that come and are delegated amongst the staff. So, again, assistant coaches at times can only control what they can control. So to keep that in mind.
Yeah. I would think that the decision makers, they probably are not X's and O's people. They're probably not the ones who understand game plans or what have you. But at the end of the day, what I believe is really important for any AD to have be conveyed from assistant coaches, I like this saying, can you choose the hard right over the easy wrong? And I think so many times there are going to be instances where you have to make tough decisions, whether it be in year one, when you still have 3 or 4 years left on your deal, and one of your better players does whatever. Do you feel compelled to say, you know what, because this is who I am, this is what we stand for in our program, I'm going to suspend you. That's kind of easy in year one because nobody assumes you're going to be good. Now, what happens in year 3, year 4, when you haven't gotten that contract extension? Some of the people are saying, hey, maybe we should fire him next year, 2 years from now. Do you still feel in your gut to make sure that you choose that hard right over the easy wrong? And I think that within itself can address so many things about who you are as a person and how you run your program from top to bottom.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that. I was having a conversation with one of our administrators, and he, kind of put asked me the question. It was like, so if you had to do a soccer search, what would you do? Great question. I don't know anything about soccer. I wouldn't even know where to start, right? So some of these ADs are in the same boat, and that's not of any weakness to them. They may be very strong at football and knowing that, or baseball, or whatever it may be. So now I think it becomes to who you rely on, and I would say just have an open mind, because we all hire people. Like I'm an assistant coach, but I might hire a GA. I might hire an ops or a video or something like that, or be in on it. So now it's, well, what are you looking for? And I think to us, there's like certain pillars that we look for, or at least that I look for when it comes to hiring. Accountability, type of person, good person. Are they off themselves? Little things like that. I'm just throwing some things out there. But I think also the biggest thing is that I try to have when we sit down, we talk about who do we want to hire, is just have an open mind to it. Just because this person may have a ton of experience or this person may not have as much experience doesn't make him any more better. Now, the experience does help, but it doesn't mean he's the right person for that job. And just trying to have an open mind as to who that person can be, as opposed to just pigeonholing someone to that because they had the right amount of experience, or they came from a certain place, or they have geographical ties to something, would be my advice. And just have a broad base of who you talk to, who knows these people, the ins and outs, so you get a general idea for who they are and what makes them good.
Yeah. Last question, and you kind of dovetailed into it nicely. So let's flip the script a little bit. Let's say you're the AD. What question would you ask an aspiring head coach or a coaching candidate for basketball search? What one question you'd make sure you'd ask and be very keen on seeing what their answer was?
Yeah, I think when it comes to accountability, it's something that all coaches talk about, and I think it's one of those things that's easier said than done, and it's a critical element of any program. I think a great question would be, hey, tell me in what areas of your program will you have measures of accountability, and then what does that accountability look like within that area, so that you get a great feel for how is this coach going to respond and behave and treat the players when this situation arises, and then you have to hold people accountable. I think that's critical because you're trying to get some insight on, how will this person be when he's a representative of this institution and a leader of young student athletes, and you want to be on the same page with that kind of stuff. Like that's part of the fit and everything. Both sides being happy with the direction of the program.
I would use the analogy of as an assistant coach, I'm going out and I'm recruiting a prospect, and I know he's good enough. My head coach thinks he's good enough. I've seen you play well. I've seen you score 20 or 30 points. I'm always curious to see when you aren't playing as well, when you have early foul trouble, how do you respond? Can you do other things that help you overcome those adversities? How are you in those adverse situations? And again, it goes back to what I said. I would ask the potential head coach, when the crap hits the fan, where are you? What are your philosophies? What are your ideals? And again, can you choose the hard right over the easy wrong? And if so, show me some instances in the past in which you've had to make some of those tough decisions. Illustrate those things to me and articulate them to me, because I think that is one of the things that everybody knows. When everything is going well, you've got 20-win seasons and everything, but when you've had a couple of injuries and you had a down season or maybe two, all right, how are you going to react? How are you going to respond? I think those are the more critical things that an AD may want to really get into the heart of a prospect with.
Yeah, I know I'm not going to answer your question. I don't think there is one question you can ask and say this guy's got to be keen on it. I think you have to take I think just like we go out and evaluate players, go out and evaluate coaches, see how they interact, and now do your homework. We have to do our homework on players we're evaluating. So it's the same thing. They're evaluating us as coaches and as people. And I just don't think there's one question that can kind of encapsulate all that, as opposed to really getting out there and doing your homework, relying on your resources, a number of resources, and then scouting them.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I mean, we ask these players tough questions. As I've gone through the business, I've asked them tougher questions because I really want to know who they are now. And I think it's got to be the same way. And you just got to rely on your gut, but your resources as well, and then your evaluation of them as a person, as a coach, to get the best feel for them. But I think, it also goes back to just keeping an open mind and not just going in there and think I'm going to hire this one person with this set of qualifications, but an open mind and to what you want.
Yep. Okay, good. I appreciate your time.